1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, thanks. I don't know when they're starting their schedule for 11, but we'll see. All right, bye-bye.
I'm at 11:30. I told them if they want to fight, we'll have to try and back in.
I like the mic stand.
Oh, yeah. Watch it, watch it, watch it. It will be, I think, once you spread it out.
gathering everybody?
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Alright. No, I did not. I did, yeah. I'm gonna have to figure that out after. Alright.
This is that boater story. Make sure you can hear me. Mic check, mic check, mic check. 1 2 1 2 1 2. Mic check, mic check, mic check. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 4 4 3 2 1. Mic check, mic check. All right. Mic check, mic check, mic check. 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 6. Got me? Okay, can you let the web department know that this will be streaming? All right, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. First, let me thank our partners from Florida Fish and Wildlife, Captain Bill Holcomb and Lieutenant Matthew De La Rosa. I want to acknowledge from the State Attorney's Office, I'm here with Jill Hamill, who's our Felony Bureau Chief, and Stephanie Pizarro, who leads our Traffic Homicide Unit. And most importantly, we're joined today by Donna Campbell, who is Jasina's grandmother. We're here today because of a tragedy, one that has shattered many lives and one that was entirely avoidable. Back on May 17th, 12-year-old Jasina Campbell was out for a day of fun on the Alafia River, being towed behind a boat on a raft with a friend. At that time, Andrew Miltner, 40 years old, was operating a wave runner after he had been drinking and was under the influence when he slammed into that raft. In that moment, he ended everything. Not just Jasina's day of fun, but her entire life. Over the past several months, our office has worked with Fish and Wildlife to prepare to bring charges against Mr. Miltner, to hold him accountable for what he took away, not just Jasina and her life, but from her family and from our entire community. As of this morning, the State Attorney's Office has charged Andrew Miltner with 2 counts, one of boating under the influence manslaughter, that's BUI manslaughter, and one with vessel homicide. We charged him with both these counts because it gives us 2 different avenues to hold him accountable for what he did. Legally, these 2 counts will eventually merge. He can't be convicted of both. This is every parent's worst nightmare. Public safety is the top priority of the State Attorney's Office, and we are here today and will be fighting for Jasina to hold Miltner accountable for what he did. Everyone who's planning to spend time around the water and on our roadways this weekend needs to understand that BUI, DUI will not be tolerated in our community, not by our law enforcement partners, not by the State Attorney's Office. And as we come up on a holiday weekend, if you're drinking, if you've had too much to drink, before you get out on the road, before you get out on the waterways, think long and hard about the risks that you're taking, the lives that you're endangering, and the price you may ultimately have to pay. I'm going to turn it over to Captain Holcomb from Fish and Wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you. On May 17th, an incident occurred on the Alafia River involving a personal watercraft operated by Andrew Joseph Miltner, age 40, and a boat towing a tube. Jasina Campbell and another child were riding on the tube when Mr. Miltner's PWC collided with the tube, fatally striking Jasina. FWC, Hillsborough County Fire Rescue, and the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene. Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office deployed their dive team. The other rider in the tube was transported with injuries, but sadly, Jasina was recovered by the dive team deceased. On December 7th, we arrested Mr. Miltner and charged him with BUI manslaughter and vessel homicide. Our investigation determined that Mr. Miltner's consumption of alcohol, reckless operation of the PWC, including an accelerated speed in the idle speed zone and failure to avoid collision with the inner tube, caused the death of Jasina. Although there were significant delays due to the ongoing pandemic, we were able to conduct a thorough investigation and make an arrest in this case, and we hope that this brings some closure to the family. With the upcoming New Year's Eve holiday, we want to remind voters that voting while impaired by alcohol or drugs is dangerous and illegal. Last year, 32% of voting fatalities in Florida were determined to be a result of alcohol or drug-related issues. Our officers continually patrol the water looking for impaired operators who will face arrest if found to be operating under the influence of drugs or alcohol. We encourage the public to report people who are operating boats dangerously or while impaired by calling 1-888-404-FWCC or texting tip@myfwc.com. We want to again extend our sincere condolences to Jasina's family, as well as thank the State Attorney for their hard work on this case. I'd now like to invite Jasina's grandmother, Donna Campbell, to come up and say a few words.
The Campbell and Gibbs families would like to thank the FWC and the State Attorney's Office for their hard work and the long, intense investigation that led to the charges being filed against the person they feel is responsible for the death of our girl, Jasina. Miltner is a person who chose to make bad choices. It resulted in a death. Bad choices need to result in consequences for those choices and bring justice for Jasina. No, it won't bring her back. Jasina's missed every day by many people. She has parents who love her deeply. Still, for her mom, Jasina was her best friend. She has a brother and a sister, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, her school, and many more that love her and miss her. Jasina's missed every day by many people. She was the kind of girl you would want to be around and have in your own family or be your friend. She had so many things to do still. She had friends to make, people to meet, boyfriends, marriage, and children ahead of her. She loved to draw and paint. She was artistic. Babies loved her. She helped take care of her brother and sister. She loved to travel with her grandparents. Every summer, she traveled with them. She had sleepovers. They don't have that anymore. No one can share these things. She had cousins to grow with and share with. My list could go on and on. I could talk about her all day. There are many who look forward to seeing Jasina again in the wonderful paradise on earth that God promises. We look forward to that. Making bad choices like drinking or taking illegal drug substances to intoxication can result in fatal outcomes. It not only destroys yourself, it destroys families like ours with the loss of our Jasina.
Happy to take any questions at this time. Yes.
You mentioned just it did take longer with the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about, what did take long, not criticizing, but just, what did take long to get the process?
Sure. I mean, the investigation took several months, working first Fish and Wildlife, doing the investigation. Witnesses have to be interviewed. Crime scene has to be analyzed. There are forensic tools that are utilized. For example, what came out during the preliminary hearing in terms of the blood alcohol level that has to be collected and submitted to FTLE for evidence. And we want to make sure that we have everything right before we file charges. And COVID slowed things down a little bit, as the captain referenced, but we were appreciative of the fact that we were able to get to this day where not only Miltner was arrested a couple weeks ago, but now we could actually formally file charges against him this morning. His blood alcohol level was approximately about a 0.07. That was taken about 4 hours after the incident occurred.
Did he say anything when he was actually arrested? Anything about what had happened?
He did make comments. That's part of the evidence in the case that we've used to build against him in terms of establishing that he was under the influence and acting in a reckless manner. I'm not going to get into the specifics of what he said at this time, however.
You mentioned that the two different charges that he's facing will provide prosecutors with two different avenues for prosecution. Can you maybe discuss the differences between the two, and is one more difficult than the other?
Sure. So there are two separate charges. Just like when there's a vehicular manslaughter on the road, we're by law we can charge both DUI manslaughter and vehicular homicide. Here we have the same thing. We charge the BUI manslaughter plus the vessel homicide. The vessel homicide essentially requires the state to prove, of course, beyond and to the exclusion of any reasonable doubt, that he was operating in a reckless manner that caused the death of another person. The BUI manslaughter requires us to prove that he was actually under the influence of alcohol at the time the crash occurred. So it gives us two pathways to prove the conduct. One is he could be reckless without being under the influence of alcohol, and one is if he's under the influence of alcohol, that is per se recklessness. So it gives us two viable legal paths to go forward on. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, he can only be convicted of one under state law. The two merge together. So if we got to trial and he was convicted of both, they would merge into one single charge.
What kind of sentence would you be looking at?
Both are second-degree felonies, so it's a maximum of 15 years. It is not a maximum of 30 years for the two, again, because they merge. It's a maximum of 15 years. Interestingly enough, whereas under Florida law, for a DUI manslaughter, there is a mandatory minimum of 4 years. There is no mandatory minimum for BUI manslaughter in the state of Florida.
Did investigators make contact with him that evening?
They did.
But he left the scene after the crash.
Again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of what happened that day in terms of the strengths and weaknesses and the specific issues of the case.
Can you talk a little bit about what happens now? Like, what's the next step in the process?
He'll be arraigned. His arraignment, I don't believe, has been scheduled yet. Again, charges were just filed this morning, and he'll have a chance to come in, and the arraignment is the beginning of the formal process where he has a chance to plead not guilty. He'll be appointed counsel if he can't afford one at that time, and then the process will go from there through the discovery process until we ultimately have to get to trial to be able to prove his guilt.
So he was formally charged this morning. Is he in jail right now, or?
He is. After his arrest, at his initial appearance a couple weeks ago, he was given a bond of $75,000 on each of the two counts. There were other conditions of release that the state was able to impose, or the state was able to request that the court imposed. He has not posted bond yet, so as of this morning, he was still in custody.
And he's at the Hillsborough County Jail?
He is.
What were those charges on December 7th? Are
The-
those the same as this?
Those are the charges that underlie the arrest, the BUI and the vessel homicide.
If you want to cover, maybe they make the arrest, they recommend the charges, and we have to review everything.
Right. So, as it almost always happens, when law enforcement makes an arrest, they have to list the substantive charges as the basis for the arrest. The arrested individual has the right to go before a judge to have their release conditions set, and then the state has a certain amount of time, depending on whether the person's in custody or not, or whether it's a felony or misdemeanor, to actually file formal charges. So this morning, we filed the information charging him with the two counts.
What about the other rider? Were they injured? Was that a child, a teenager?
The other rider was a 13-year-old girl who was a friend of Jasina's, who was injured because she's a minor, and thankfully she survived with relatively minor injuries. We're not releasing her name.
When you're dealing with a DUI as opposed to a DUI, a case like this on the water, is it more difficult for investigators to gather the evidence they need to make an arrest?
That's
And kind of thinking that you mentioned that the holiday weekend is coming up, what difficulties do you face in prosecuting?
These cases are always difficult. It requires a lot of evidence gathering that's often compromised at the scene. We're grateful to not just FWC for the job they did in this case, but all our law enforcement partners. Anytime they're investigating a tragic crash on our roadways or on our waterways, they have to go and piece together what happened after the fact. And BUI presents some different challenges for the state attorney's office than a DUI, but at the end of the day, we build a case as strong as we can based on the evidence we have, and we try everything within our power to hold the defendant accountable for his conduct. I'm sorry, the second thing you asked was going into the holiday weekend, as both, as the captain mentioned, as I alluded to earlier, people want to celebrate this weekend. It's been a long 2020. I know there's a desire for people to get out and to enjoy this time with loved ones. We just ask that people do it responsibly. Again, if you're going to drink, be responsible, have a plan. Before you get on the road, before you get on the waterways, think about what you're doing.
Ma'am, would we be able to ask you any questions? I know you read a brief statement. Would we be able to ask you a brief question or two? I just was hoping for people that didn't know her, you know, what you could communicate to people about, you know, what it was like to spend this, as far as you're comfortable speaking, what it was like to spend this holiday without her. What this has been like for you.
The holiday really didn't come into place because every day is basically the same without Jasina. what her parents without them, the family and the friends that I talked about. So every day's just hard.
What does it mean for you to know that someone has now been arrested and just today, you know, formally charged with her death?
We look for a day that the person responsible, that justice will happen, and that person can have consequences for their actions and their behavior that resulted in Jasina's death. It could have happened to any other person who was on the water at that time. His choices that day resulted in a death, and there needs to be consequences.
Is there anything else that you would like to share about who Jasina was?
I could talk about her all day. She was just pleasant. She was always happy. She was 12. She'd be 13 by now. So we missed that, her being 13. She was your typical 12-year-old, but she was always happy from the time she was a baby till her last day. She helped take care of her brother and sister, which she did happily. Her mom specifically is having a really hard time. To her, Sina was like her best friend. They did so many things together. They're both very silly. Her mom is very silly, so Jasina took that after her. So it's just hard on a lot of people for a lot of different reasons.
Have you found any way to remember Jasina, you know, when you're down or when you're thinking about the days ahead? How will you remember your granddaughter?
There's a lot of ways. People have been very thoughtful in providing different memorabilia about her. At home, one thing specifically that was gifted to me and my husband was a shadow box with different things in it. Her mom and her dad received one too. Someone has made a blanket for her mom. Her dad has a plaque. One of her aunts has made a wall specifically with memorabilia of her. It's a beautiful wall. There's a lot of different ways that family, her school, KCC, Community College, middle school, when they lost her, they had a very hard time last year. And this year, after the summer and school started again, they've made a memory area. I forget what they call it. A memorial garden. Yes, thank you. They planted a tree in her memory. It has a plaque there. It has seating for the kids. They painted a mural on a wall. It's a place where the kids can go for their basic everyday activities. They've planted like vegetables and plants, and there's just so many things that the community has done and family and friends have done to always remember Jasina.
And why did you want to come out here today to stand with these law enforcement officers and speak to us?
I was asked to do it, and I can. Inside doesn't look, I hope, as good as the outside does. It's hard, but I want to be able to talk about her. I want everyone else to be able to talk about her. She was awesome. And to bring, hopefully, someone else who may be thinking about drinking or taking drugs of some sort, become intoxicated. Think before you do it. Stay home if you're going to do it. New Year's Eve, stay home, drink, go to bed. You've had your fun. Don't go out and take advantage of other people, because it could happen to you. It could happen to you if you are the one that is doing the drinking and the driving or the boating. Don't ruin someone else's life too.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, thank you all for being here. I do have some photos. Jasina Campbell was very gracious to share some. If you come by, give me your email address. I'll send you that link. You can download it. All right. Thank you again,
Thank you all.
everybody.
Thank you.